Hi everyone, this is Michael from Blue Road Home Studio. It is early in the morning, I am in the North Garden, and I am here to give you your weekend music production tip. In this edition, we're going to talk about saturation and how it can bring warmth and presence and character to your tracks. And a special bonus for you, I'm going to tell you where you can download a free saturation plugin, so you'll be able to try everything that we're talking about today. What is saturation? Saturation is kind of a soft compression that kind of tames peaks, and it adds harmonic frequencies. So that's the key here. It generates harmonic frequencies that are rather pleasing to the ear. Let me explain. Take a look at this. So what I've done here is I've set up an oscillator on my track, and it's generating a sine wave at around 98 hertz. Now I'm doing this so that you can visually see what a saturator does. So now I'm going to open up this saturator, and this is your free saturation plugin, which I will explain where you can get in a moment. Now on my master bus here, I have a flat EQ, so I'm not adding or subtracting any frequencies. This is just so you can see what the sine wave is doing. If you notice the sine wave, it's just kind of this peak right here around 98 hertz. Now, watch what happens when I instantiate the saturation plugin. Check it out. There's these added harmonic frequencies that are coming in. Now, these added harmonic frequencies are really the nuts and bolts of saturation. It's essentially creating these nice warm tones around the original signal. This is kind of what we call distortion, but saturation and distortion are commonly used together, although it's not really like distortion like a heavy guitar. It's used more for warmth. However, you can add saturation to very distorted guitars and you can get a really nice extra distortion on those guitars. What's really happening here is we're emulating what we call tape saturation. Have you ever listened to a Led Zeppelin album? This is a great example of tape saturation. Listen to John Bonham's drums. Listen to how loud they sound. Now, he was an amazing drummer. He would play his drums very hard, but the secret was they were recording his drums into an analog tape machine. And when they were recording his drums into the tape machine, they were actually redlining the signal going into the tape machine. So they were clipping the signal going into that tape machine. But analog tape has a nice way of rolling off those high frequencies. It kind of has a natural compression on the high frequencies. And that's really what tape saturation is. It's a little bit of distortion, but it's a very pleasing and soft kind of distortion. You never want a redline going into your digital interface when you're recording because digital distortion sounds terrible. Okay, it's nothing like tape saturation. So what we're doing with saturation plugins is really trying to emulate some of that tape saturation. It's kind of interesting because with digital recordings have gotten very clean. So now we're trying to get back a little bit of the dirtiness that comes from analog tape recording. So you'll see saturators come in different plugin forms. Some are hardware. I have an Alesia Character. It's with a K, and I use that sometimes as an outboard saturator, an outboard analog piece of gear. And you'll see tape emulator plugins. You'll see this Knob plugin, which is the one I'm talking about today, which is free. To try this out, go ahead and download this from softtube.com. You can create an account. There's no strings attached to the account. You don't have to spend any money. You just have to create an account. Go to the products and then filter the lowest to the highest price, and then you'll see this option here that you can download. It's the Softtube Saturation Knob. That's the one I'm using in this example, and try it out on your tracks. Now, one thing to note, again, when you're using a saturation plugin, as you dial up that saturation, you are also dialing up the volume of the track. You don't necessarily always want to dial up the volume of the track, so as you're adding saturation, you probably want to bring some of that back, unless you're going for a volume type effect. But again, remember one thing, volume doesn't always equal better, so you want to kind of bring that volume down and then hear what the saturator is actually doing, because you don't want to just raise the volume because that's just going to sound better to you anyway. So you want to have kind of an objective ear of what you're trying to do with the sound. Now I'm telling you about this third-party plugin because it's actually really easy to use. It's got a couple different modes on it, and you can really test it out very easily. Logic Audio doesn't actually have a proprietary saturator on it. I hope that they do in the near future, and they probably will. Right now, to get around that, though, if you want to try one in Logic and not get the free plugin, you can go to the FAT effects, and then what you have to do is just disable everything except this little distortion section. Here you can choose between different saturation types, so you can try the tube saturation, or you can also try the soft saturation. Try any one of them actually, but the soft saturation and the tube seem really nice, and you just dial that up and then you can hear how it sounds on your track. Now, I showed you a visual representation of what saturators do, but again, you want to use your ears, see what they're actually doing. Try it in context with your track. Maybe take your drum bus, add some saturation to that drum bus. Perfect to do. Vocals, saturation sounds wonderful on. Guitars, saturation sounds great. You don't want to overdo it because then you do get kind of an overdriving sound, but if you use it subtly, it can actually add volume to your track overall, and you can kind of use it in the way that you use a compressor. Compressors we'll talk about another day, but you can use a saturation plugin kind of like a compressor. Usually they're used very well in tandem with each other. You can also go nuts with saturation and just really overdrive it and use it as an effect. Just make sure you're not redlining. Now, as always, I like to leave you with a few things that you can listen to. You can go back and listen to some Led Zeppelin albums, of course. There is a band that I really like called Elbow, and go listen to their album Cast of Thousands. There's one song in particular, Fugitive Motel, and it's a really beautiful song, but it's a great example of some subtle saturation being used. You can hear it on the drums, you can hear it on the bass, you can hear it on the singer's voice, and it makes him just sound very warm. It just adds warmth to the overall track. It's a beautiful track in general, but all through that album, you can hear great examples of subtle saturation in the background. Another great track that you can listen to is That Light by my good friend Karam. He's an amazing artist. I actually worked on the mix on this track. There's amazing musicians on this track, including Alex Lifeson from Rush, my good friend Ryan Brown. He's the drummer for Dweezil Zappa, and a wonderful friend of mine, Mark Thomas, who I consider one of the best guitar players ever. So take a listen to the choruses in this track. I actually used my Alicia character on his voice. It's subtle, but you can hear some of that saturation in his vocals, and it fits his voice really nice. And I use saturation all throughout this track. So take a listen to that. Happy weekend, everybody. Have fun trying out that saturator. As always, keep being creative and keep producing music.